So the way I got started with Vue was in a project that was using Vuetify, which is a design framework that's built on top of Vue. And when you go to Vuetify's website and learn how to install it, it first has you install the Vue application using the command line interface, and then it has you install Vuetify on top of that. And when you're done with all that installing, you're left with this application that's fully scaffolded out with a lot of tooling. If you don't know what that means, not a big deal. It just means you've got this big project that's got a lot of stuff that it does for you that you don't have to understand what's happening. And it tries to make things more simple for you. But what you might not understand, or what I didn't understand, was how all the components of Vue work together and how everything rolled up and got put back into the website where the application resides, or the HTML document where the application is mounted. Hi, I'm Terry Caliendo. In this video, I want to take some time to just make a very simple Vue application that's built on basic HTML with plain JavaScript, where we can just learn how some of the components of Vue work together. So what do you say? Let's do this! Alright, so here we are on the desktop. And if you look on the left-hand side here, I've got my editor going, which is connected to the server. And then over here, I have a web browser that's pulling from the server. So you can see I've got 2 exclamation points now. If I delete one of them, hit save, and then hit refresh over here, you'll see that the changes happen in the browser when I hit refresh. So let's go and add the Vue instance to this project. Let's pretend like this is a project we've had in place for a while. We want to just go add some reactive functionality to our project, right? So if we come over to Vue, and I'll start from the beginning here of Vue. Here's Vue's website. You click Get Started, and when you scroll down in the Get Started section, they'll say a quick, easy way to get started is to just put this script into the head of your project. So I'm just going to go full screen here and show that all we got to do is put that in the project. So now we've brought the entire Vue development framework into our project just by doing that. And you'd switch it to the production script below if you were to actually deploy this scenario later. So the next thing we need to do is put this hello world inside something that Vue can attach itself to. So let's create a div and give it an ID equal to, we'll call it app. Now you can give this any name you want, but typically it's called app. So now we've got something for Vue to attach to. So let's create some script stuff down here. And first thing I'm going to do is create a variable, and I'm going to call it my Vue instance. If I can spell it right. And I'm going to create a new Vue instance that I am going to send a configuration object to. And this Vue is made available. This Vue object that I'm newing up comes from this script. So this script makes it available, the object available for us to new up by calling new Vue. And we're setting it to a variable here so that when we go to the browser and look in the console here, we can do some things and play around with the instance. So first thing I want to do is tell it what to attach to, right? So I need to tell it to attach to the ID of app. And so the pound sign is a selector for an ID in the CSS world. So we're basically telling Vue, we're creating a new instance of Vue, and we're saying, hey, the element that we want to attach to has the ID of app, So it's going to put it in there. So now if I save this and I hit refresh, nothing changed other than down here in the console it's telling us, hey, we're running an instance of Vue. So let's add some interactivity, and let's put a variable in here. Now this isn't an introductory course on Vue, so if you don't know what variables are in Vue and stuff, go find another course. Please don't give me a thumbs down for not explaining very well. This is a variable in our template, and so when we come down here, we can add a data section to our Vue instance and give it an object with some properties, and I'm going to give it the message, and I'm going to say it's equal to, how are you today? Okay, and I'll hit refresh here, and you'll see that Vue has populated in our template. This is right now, this is our template because we haven't given a Vue another template to render. All we've said is attach to the app and take the contents from it and start playing with it. So it took this div and it read that this was a variable, because this is a variable in a template in Vue, and it said, hey, take this data and attach it to that message. So now we've got Vue up and running on our app, and we can see that we can change. We have reactivity. The reason we did this, where we set this new equal to a variable, I'm going to copy that and just paste it down here. And so now we can talk to that Vue instance down in the console, or elsewhere in the JavaScript we could talk to that instance if we needed to. But if I find the message variable and set it equal, you can see it's showing us that it's already equal to, how are you today? And I've already changed it before to, in previous testing, whoops, I've changed it to I'm doing great. But I'll change it again, and you'll see at the top in the document object model, Vue automatically changed the variable to the new variable for us. Now that's Vue 101. Again, get that stuff from another course if you're not fully understanding what I'm doing here. I'm trying to show more how Vue relates back to the tooling that is set up, how what we're doing here is going to relate back to the tooling. So the next thing I want to talk about is the template system. So right now, what we've done here is we have added Vue and told it to attach to the element app up here. And it's using the contents that are already there because we haven't told Vue to do anything else. But what we can do is we can add a template ourselves. And I'm just going to put some text in there first. And we'll see that we're going to get an error. And that's a tricky thing with Vue, is you'll see that all templates require a root element. So we have to give it something to attach to. So let's give it a div on the outside. And if I hit refresh, now you can see that the template that we gave the Vue instance has completely overridden the contents. So our message is gone. Now what we can do is we can take the message and we can actually put it in the div. And if I hit save and refresh, you can now see hello from a template. How are you doing today? You can see that our message variable here is getting populated from the data in the Vue instance. So this template is now overriding what's in here, which was the template before. Now, you're probably not going to use that too often because it's in quotes. It's going to be a pain if you have single quotes and double quotes in there. You're going to have to do escaping and all kinds of stuff. That's pretty cumbersome. So the best way to do it, if you're going to do an app like this, and I don't suggest you do an app like this without tooling if you're starting from scratch. If you're just doing a simple thing that you're adding to an app, fine. But if you're starting from scratch, do the fully tooled thing. Again, this tutorial is just to kind of show so you can understand better how the tooling all interacts with everything, with itself, with all the different pieces. All right, so now it's time to take a sidestep and compare what we've done to a fully scaffolded, tooled out application. So we've seen that we can pull in the power of Vue, the Vue framework, with it just a single script tag, and we can set up the Vue instance and tell it to attach itself to a certain part of the document object model. So particularly this div, which we'll call a template, and we can tell it to use a template, and we'll talk about render functions in a bit, which it can use as well. Or we can send it a template, or we can use the code that's already in the document as the template. So let's take a look at how that compares to the fully scaffolded application. So I'm going to bring in a fully scaffolded application here. And before I actually do that, let's talk about over here. I used the Vue CLI at cli.vuejs.org. This is how I scaffolded out that project, and you can go and read about how to do all the installation. Again, this isn't that basic of a tutorial. You can go and find other tutorials to figure out how to do all this stuff. But so This is an application where at the command line, I ran that Vue create and then my application name, and it scaffolded out all this stuff here. So now this is a major project compared to what we have before. And what this does is it lets you separate all of your pieces of your project into separate parts so that different people can work on different things, and then you can bring them in as components and whatnot. And we'll get into components and stuff in a little bit after we talk about render functions. So let's compare about where we're at. So in this scaffolded project here, there is a public directory which has the index.html. And if we look at that index.html and we look what's in there, you'll see that there, lo and behold, is the same thing that we're doing. There is a div with an ID of app that is allowing Vue to attach itself to. And then below it, you'll see this comment where it says built files will be auto-injected. And what's going to happen is all of this stuff over here, that's all code that you're going to write, is going to get rolled up into a single JavaScript file that's going to get put right here along with the Vue code and be called as part of the application. So that is going to be analogous to adding this script tag in the head here. So again, they've got the div there in the tooled project. It's right in that index.html file. And they've also got a div with an ID of app. And we've got a div with an ID of app, and they've got a div with an ID of app. So we're pretty much in the same place. Now, in the tooling, where is the Vue instance created? And so that is created in main.js. And main.js is the first thing to that of all these files that gets rolled up and gets put in that index.html. So let me open both files again. So main.js and all the stuff it calls after it gets rolled up into a single file that gets put here, and then main.js gets called first. And that's where this comes into play. So they've got new Vue and then some other stuff that's different. And so we're going to talk about render functions, and that'll be our next step in understanding the difference between the two. But you can see that they are newing up a new Vue instance, just like we're doing. We're newing up a new Vue instance. So take this stuff that we've done, and we're able to apply it to understand where it fits in the fully scaffolded application. And just a quick note, you'll also see that in the scaffolded version, they're not setting the new object, the new Vue object that's being created, equal to anything like we're doing. We're setting it equal to this variable that we can then talk to. And that's because typically you'll use the debugging tools that come along with the scaffolded version, and therefore you won't need the variable. Now, another thing you might notice is that they are not using the L prop here. And let me get this out of the way so I can show both at the same time. They're not using the L prop here. They are using the .mount method. So we could do that too. If I was to just copy that and shrink this down, I could comment out the L, add .mount at the end here, and we're still using the same app that we're attaching to. And so if we go back here, it should still work just fine with no errors. So if I do the inspector and look at the console, I'm not getting any errors. So what's the difference between these two? Well, this one is so that you can delay mounting your instance. So if we wanted to make sure that everything was complete, say we needed to load some external something or others in here before completely mounting the app, we could do that. So you can see that since I've created this Vue, this new Vue, attached it to my Vue instance now holds the Vue, and so I can later mount it after I do some other stuff if I need to, either asynchronous or synchronous stuff. So I'll hit save there just to show it, and then I'll come over here and hit refresh, just to show that it's still working. And just to further elaborate on that, I could actually put a set timeout function here, which would show the asynchronous delay, and put my mounting inside of there and set the timeout to 6 seconds, which would be 6,000 milliseconds. And if I hit save and hit refresh over here, you'll see that my app is not mounted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go, 6 seconds, and there it just mounted on a delay. So if you had some reason that you needed to delay mounting, that's why you would use this. Or you could put it in an asynchronous function somewhere that after it went out and maybe got user data or something, that it mounted after getting the data. All right, so let's back those changes out back to where we were. And get it back to the L. There we go. I'm going to hit save, hit refresh, and make sure everything's still working. Yes. So the next thing we need to talk about is the render function here. So everything's the same. We've got this new thing that we knew up, the new thing that we knew up here. We've got the way to mount it, which is either a mount or L. And the difference that we're still seeing here is this render function. So what is this render function versus a template or just using the code that's already there? So let's take a closer look at this render function here. And specifically, let's take a look at this app variable that's being passed into whatever's going on here, this arrow function that we'll talk about later. This app variable comes from up top here. It's being imported by the tooling. Webpack, I believe, is the culprit here that is importing this variable and pulling it from this app.vue file. So it's pulling the app.vue file, into this script and then sending it as a variable to the render function. So let's open up that app.vue file and take a look in there, and we can see something familiar. We've got that template at least, and then we've got some styling stuff below it. And you can see that there's this home and about. So let's render this real quick by running npm run serve, which in the tooling environment, this builds out all this stuff ultimately into the rendered index.html with the accompanying JavaScript, the app JavaScript file. But this is also adding some tooling, some debugging tooling. So I'll control click this. It'll open up in the window here, and we'll see that there's a home and about and then some other stuff going on. And if we go back to the code, you'll see that there's home and about, and that other stuff gets brought in by the router. Now we're not going to talk about that stuff right now, but I'm going to delete all this, and we're going to get this app, the scaffolded app, to match our current app. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to copy all of this stuff. So let's bring all of our stuff over here, and the tooling needs to know that the top part is a template. So I'll put template tags around our div, and I'm going to get rid of the ID equals app because that's unnecessary. If you remember that main.js, when we new up the view, we tell it to mount to app, which is in the index.html. So here's where our ID of app is. So consider this to be this part up, this line up here, and then this hello world stuff is in here, but we need to put it in a template and another single div to make the tooling happy. And down here, we don't need the newing part or the element, and we don't need the template. We just need the data. And so we got to do one thing for the tooling. We have to tell it to export. We're just telling it to export what we're doing, this stuff. We'll bring the data up in here. And data needs to be wrapped in a function. And I'll talk about that in a second. So we need to send the data back, and we're not going to make it we're going to return the object that has our variables in it. And if I get rid of that, so now we're similar in that we've got our template and we've got our variable. Here's our variable. We just had to do a little something different here that I'll talk about in a second. And I believe that's going to hot reload once I hit save. There it goes. It's hot reloading. And so if I go back to the window here, you can see that we're in our Vue app and we've got Hello World, how are you today? And that's the same as the other one. So our two templates that are the same, I hit the wrong button there, are coming through. So let's call this one app, and let's call this one vanilla for Vanilla JavaScript. I'll save both of those, and then I can hit refresh here, and I should get vanilla here, and over here I should get app because it already hot loaded, it's already there. So let's take a look again at what's happening here. So this render function is taking this app file, which is basically a lot of the same stuff we have here, bringing it into this new up, and then rendering it to the main div. So the next thing we have to learn about is what's happening here in this render function. What does the render function take, and what's happening from this file? What is the tooling doing to this file before it brings it in as this variable? And ultimately what it's doing is it's turning this file into a component. So the next thing we need to go and talk about is what a component is. And then we'll talk about the render function. It can take a component, and then it's going to render that component out to the ID, the div that has the ID of app. So let's take a look at Vue render functions. And you can see I've searched for this before because it's in my history. So we go to the vuejs.org, the documentation, the render functions. We'll see that the render functions are a closer to the compiler alternative to templates. And if we scroll down and take a look at, they're talking about components, which what we need to talk about in a second. But here's a render function here. So they tell you that instead you tell Vue what HTML you want on the page in a template, or you can use a render function. So this render function here looks different than what we have. So let's bring back our app template here. So this is the scaffolded version of our application. And you can see you got render H, arrow H, and then you're sending it the app thing that we were talking about. Well, that's the same as this. It's just an arrow function that's shortened it. So what we can do is take this create element, which is what is being called. So it's a Vue calls this render property and calls the function on it and sends the function this create element property, or this create element. It's actually a function. And then inside the function, you run the create element, give it some parameters, and then return what it creates. And that's exactly what this arrow function does here. If you're not familiar with arrow functions, we can take this H, which they've shortened create element to just H, but we can just do this, and that should be the same thing. So I'm going to hit save. You're going to see it recompile, and then up here, you're going to see the app is still working. And then we can further adjust it to be a function that takes the create element as an argument and then returns return, and you got to have an R. So if we hit save there, that should update and still continue to work. So hopefully you can see that's arrow functions 101. We've changed this to look like this. If I just format it, you'll see that they're the same, except that you can see here it's a function with a create element, function create element, and then we're returning the call to the create element. We're turning the call to the create element, but we're sending it the app variable, which comes from this other file, and in this instance they're sending it a different couple set of parameters. So now we got to look at this create element thing and see what it can take and what it can handle. So here's the arguments for create element. And you'll see that create element returns a V node, which ultimately render function is going to want a V node to render. But this create element can take a string, which is an HTML tag name. So that's what they're doing above, is they're sending it a tag name and then some text to go within that tag. But we're actually going to send it component options, which we'll talk about in a second, or an async function resolving to one of those. That's not what they're doing here. But so we're going to focus on this component options thing. So what's happening here in the tooled app is the tooling is taking this app.view, it's taking the template here and this data thing, and it's pulling it all into one thing that's called component options, and then it's putting it in here and sending it to the create element that's going to then render it out to the page. So let's take a look at that in this world over here, in the JavaScript world, in our vanilla JavaScript world. So how would we introduce a component into this and put that component in the page? So let's head back over here and talk about Vue components. So if we go to the documentation on vuejs.org, we'll see that this is a format, an example of a Vue component. This is the format here. Well, it's basically the data and the template stuff that we've been talking about. So let me minimize that back. So let's just copy this code here, and let's take it to our vanilla JavaScript and talk about what's happening. Now notice I placed our code here before the new Vue instance. Before we instantiate Vue on top of our application, we're calling Vue here. And so this is not using the Vue instance, this is using Vue's object, and it's got a method of .component. So it's brought in through up here, through the JavaScript up here makes the Vue object available, and we can call what would be, in other worlds, static methods on that component where we don't have to instantiate the object first. So we're calling this Vue.component thing, and we're going to change this to, I'm going to call this, because it's a global component, we'll talk about that, I'm going to call it global component. And then this data function, we are going to return here. And now in a component, the data needs to be a function so that when you use a component multiple times, it will have access to independent variables within. But since we're just attaching it to the root for now, we should just be able to send it an object. We'll see if it complains, and maybe I'll have to fix it. And then for our template, and let's get this thing to be happy. View component data. Oh, the template's in the wrong spot. Now it should be happy as soon as I get rid of this line. Okay, so we've got our how are you today and our template. We're going to take this stuff. Actually, let's get it all on one line first. And we're going to take this stuff, put it in our template. And now we've still got this div with the app for it to attach to. And I'm missing an outer tag here, so I'll hit save here, and I'm going to just come back over here and run it. And you'll see we get an error. The data, so it is mad. The data option should be a function that returns a persistent value. So let's go back to making that a function. So I'm just going to copy their data function just to save time here. And I'm going to put this in here. So now the data as the component is a function. So I hit save and I'll refresh. Okay, now this is not working. I haven't put the component in the app, so I need to do there. So now the component is in the app, and if I hit refresh, I'm still getting a message, an error that there has to be one root element, so I have to make this a div. Or a template, I think I could use. But now it works. And so now our application has been transformed. We took the template out of our div. We put it inside a component. And notice we didn't have to register this component with our instance because we created a global component. And that global component can be accessed from anywhere. So it could be in child components. And this is what you would use if you were using something like Vuetify, where it's giving you special components to use. They're all global components that you can use anywhere in your code. Now, but that doesn't relate to what we were talking about over here in our app code. So here's our app code again. And remember, we were sending to the render function, we were sending the component options, not a component. So what we can actually do is we can just get rid of this view.global component, and we can call it local component options, just a variable. And I should specifically give it a var or a let. And we'll take that away. So now all it is an object that we've created. We're not calling anything. And now we can take this local options and put it in a components section. And components takes an object. So we're going to Pascal case this. Into the local component, and then I'm going to change global to local up here. So now what I've done is I've turned my template into a set of options that we could give to the view.component to make it a global component, or we could just take the options and put them in a components section within our instance. So I'll save that, and I'll hit refresh over here, and you can see that it's still working. So let's call this Vanilla local component option, just so that we can see that it's coming from there. So now we've got that as a component, or we could take out that component and change this to a render function. Remember, render is H of render function looks like that in the app version. So this should be a comma. So now I'm taking the options and I'm sending them to the render function. And so that should still populate the same way. So if I hit save, and I refresh, and now it's still working. So we've taken the options and we've supplied them to the render function, and now the render function is taking over the div and rendering out the local component. So now we should be getting pretty close to, if I zip this back to the render function version, so now we're pretty close in that we've got a render function that's taking our initial page of our app, which is the top level component. That's what we're doing here, is we're turned our template into a top level component, a set of options. And so all that's happening is the tooling over here is taking this app variable, which comes from app.view. App.view is a template and data and any of the other functions you can come up with that, that components support, like watchers or computed functions or lifecycle hooks like before create, created, before mount, mounted, before destroy, all those things. So just for clarity, let's walk through this from the beginning. We've got our index.html, which has a div with an ID of app, main.js news up a Vue instance and mounts to that app. So over here in our vanilla JavaScript, we've got our div of ID app, we're newing up a Vue instance, and we're mounting it to the L of app. Then this is no longer needed. We took this out. So I'll save that and just show it that that doesn't change anything by taking that out. We've got a render function. Same here. We've got a render function that's rendering the output of a set of component options. These component options are compiled from the app.view. Here, we've got component options that are coming from local component options. So this part right here is emulating what is returned when the tooling compiles app.view into a set of local component options. Now, if this here, if there was a component loaded in here to load child components into this app, say this was the the navigation, and we wanted to load the a sidebar, a header or a footer or something, we could load it through a component here, and so that would just be the same as putting components on this component here. So this does nothing because I didn't actually give it any values, but I could save both of those and go back to our thing here and see that everything is still working. So in other words, I could take this other component and make it subcomponent options and say I'm a subcomponent. So you can see my message will be hello world, I'm a subcomponent. So if we save that and do this, nothing's going to change because we haven't put it in anything. But we can take this subcomponent options, we can put it in here, and we have to Pascal case this because we don't have tooling to make things better for us. And then the subcomponent we'll put in our template, which is right here. So we'll put the subcomponent, oops, let me make it like that. So I'm putting the subcomponent in my template. And you see how this gets out of hand, and this is why you want to use the tooling, which rolls everything up for you. So if I hit save here, we should now hit refresh here, and you can see that after how are you today, which is the message, local component option, how are you today comes from the message, which is this. And then after it is the subcomponent that we're putting in. So you can see how the cascading, you can start to make a top level component and then include sub-level components, and all that's rolled up into here. And so the same thing would happen in your main app if you were in the tooled environment and we wanted to include another component. I would then have to create another component over here. So I could just use this home, which is already a component. So if I include this home in the app, I would add a components, and then that's an object that takes the home, but we have to import it. So I'm going to copy just an import code and put that at the top of the script, and we're going to import home from views/home, and that's going to be our home variable. And so I could do this, and then I just put home here as a component. And now hopefully if I save this, failed to compile, relative module was not found because I spelled views wrong. Now it's happy. So if we go back and we look at you can see that that was brought in. And just to hammer that home, let's make it a subcomponent. In here, let's change this to hello, I'm a subcomponent. And now if we go back and refresh our app version, you see it's already hot loaded. I'm a subcomponent. So hopefully that starts to make sense. I'm going to go through it one more time here. Let's talk about it from the top. Index.html has the div ID app, main.js, news up a Vue instance, mounts on that div, and then calls a render function and sends it component options. Same thing over here. We've got our, we bring in Vue, and then we new up an instance. We tell it to attach to the element of app, which is up here. It's just all in one file in our vanilla JavaScript. And then we render out a start of component options, which is going to start our cascading of components. And then we just send it the stuff we would use to create a component. And this right here is the equivalent of app.vue. And if you aren't sure about what I'm talking about as far as components, this is our root level component, and you can see we can have child components. So this is the root component. This is the app.vue that then cascades out to all the other components. Same with here. This is our app.vue in the vanilla JavaScript. That is the root set of component options that can include other components, where we can start to build out a heavily componentized and independently worked application where all the pieces kind of come together as one. Woo! All right. Well, it got a little tedious there at the end. I did a lot of editing, but obviously not a ton of editing. Hopefully you were able to follow everything, though, and you now understand a good deal the difference between a fully tooled out scaffolded app and a vanilla JavaScript app just thrown in an HTML page. You're definitely going to want to use the scaffolded tooled out application if you're starting from scratch and building a real application. If you're just throwing something in a web page because you need a little extra functionality, that's cool with the regular vanilla JavaScript stuff, but you're going to run into problems with using ES6, the new JavaScript syntax on old browsers. That's what the tooling application does for you, is it just fills in everything for you and makes it all work out with Babel and Webpack and all the things it does. And that's what that tooling brings to the world for you. So again, Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers. If you made it this far, then you probably like what I do, so hit the subscribe button if you would, and maybe give me a thumbs up right there. And that's about it. Thanks for joining. Thanks for playing along. We'll see you in the next video.